want to thank Brother Alton Maddox, the president of the United African Movement, and all of you brothers and sisters who have come out this evening. Earlier you saw part of a video that we made last year in the Democratic Republic of Congo. You saw the commemoration of the 37th anniversary of the independence, where Patrice Lumumba proclaimed the independence of probably the richest piece of real estate in the world. In the region had come to Kinshasa, the capital, and had shown their support for President Laurent Kabila. There was another part that I wanted to show, but I don't know if it would make sense now. I mean, it would make sense, but it's very long. And maybe I better take advantage of this opportunity right now to talk to you, because that's originally what I come to do. And I come here because also I want you to know that I feel that what the UAM is doing is very, very worthwhile. I think that your dedication, particularly what you did upstate by going there day after day to show that you're not going to let sleeping dogs lie, to turn a phrase. Brothers and sisters, comrades and friends, we're living in a very, very dangerous period. But as it was said by a European author so many years ago, we live in the best of times and we live in the worst of times. And because we are activists, because we're revolutionaries, we feel that we need to take heed of the best of times. Alton Maddox was speaking before about the minor Owens. And you could take the same thing with the situation with nappy hair the other day. When you see how they can take things out of context and then it comes down to making something very bountiful for a woman who, I don't know her political background. I've read some things about her. I happened to see her on Montel Williams' program, along with the white teacher that tried to introduce this book about nappy hair. And you can only think that when we do something like this, all the years that we have, when we started the Black is Beautiful movement in 1961, and had to fight, almost had to fight Negroes with fists over the idea of a black woman wearing their hair natural. And the white media wouldn't deal with us. They didn't want to. We did a program which used hair as a social statement, how one wears one hair, before the hippies did hair. But when the hippies did hair, they put everything behind it to actually put that out there. But what I was thinking about in regards to that is that when I happened to turn on this program by accident and saw this woman who wrote the book and a school teacher, and then hear Montel Williams say that the book is good, don't listen to these other people talking about it, go out there and buy it. And that's how he signed off. And I thought to myself, well, what does Montel Williams know about nappy hair? You know, he doesn't wear his hair nappy. You know, he shaves it off. And I'm not against that. I mean, that's part of our history. That's part of our tradition. We have made it a major statement, so even white people are now running around bald heads. But he doesn't have an African woman. You know, so he doesn't have anybody to look at the kinky hair. So why could he make the definitive statement on kinky hair? And when you start to go around, you see a white woman telling black children about their hair. And they're looking at this white woman with blonde hair and blue eyes. So they already have in the back of their minds, in their subliminal consciousness, the idea that this woman is the epitome of beauty, no matter what she looks like, because she has some of the paradigms that actually are supposed to be, you know, where blondes have more fun. So what happens now is the children are looking at it, and I don't care if it was a Xerox copy of the book or hear somebody talking about, you know, nappy hair, and they see a white person, they think they're doing it almost tongue-in-cheek. They think they're being cynical. They think they're making fun of them. And so we have to do that at a point where we have to understand, too, that we are responsible for teaching our children what's, you know, how they're supposed to be. They shouldn't be able to tell anybody that. There are some things that you can listen, and a white person might say something that makes a lot of sense. Because of the history of what they do, they might be even admitting something. But when you come to something as sensitive as that, you don't allow that to happen. I don't want to just go into that, but I think it's important because Alton was saying about things that we have actually done, and people just run off with it to make money, do whatever, you know, whatever they want. But it's very, very important how we view these things. We have to understand that the biggest thing, the weapon that white people have actually been able to use against us, let me give you the words of Steve Biko. He said, the greatest weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the minds of the oppressed. Now, when you start to think about the moment that white people won their battle over us was not when they physically won it by force of arms, but when they could cause enough confusion among our people that black people started to use the criteria for being an African and turn it into pejorative terminology. Because you don't ever hear no Chinese running around calling each other yellow, so slant eyes, so and so. They wouldn't do that. You don't hear white people doing that. But when you saw that when they got the black man and black woman to hate themselves, so that later on that Madam Walker could become a first millionairess in this country based on she found a way to straighten black women's hair. Now you got to think what that means, you know. Or if they tell you, you know, like I saw a Jet magazine cover, was going through some old magazine and said, Halle Berry, you know, and I have nothing against her. I think she's a, you know, a very, very interesting person, you know. And I'm saying it because of what she said about her own role when they were giving her a role to play in the Egyptian. And she said that she thought the Egyptians were black people. I thought that was good. But when somebody else takes her, like they did with Lena Horne years ago, and say that she's the most beautiful woman in the race, or this time they say the most beautiful woman, then I just tell you that the only reason why they say that because she's saying that because of her ethnic background, her makeup, that she has, for the most part, has been physically negated of her Africanness. And it has nothing to do with somebody being in the group, in the race, because that is not what we're saying. But it has how we perceive the European as setting the paradigms for everything that we do. And when you do that, when you accept that, then you have become, or you can become, your own worst enemy. Right now, we're looking at the fact that we're moving toward the millennium. We're going into countdown years. And I'd like to, at this particular point, to ask Alton Maddox and the UAM to participate into something that I think that you need to be involved in. Next year, on the 16th of August, will mark the 40th anniversary of the convention to abrogate the term Negro and replace it with Black and African. This was a convention that was held just a few blocks away from here, 132nd Street at the William C.M.E. Institutional Church, which called for a convention to get rid of the word Negro and replace it with Black when speaking of color, irrespective of complexion, the birthplace. Out of that came the foundation for the Black is Beautiful movement that developed in the late 1960s and burst on the scene on the 20th of January 1962 with the Grandassa models, with the AJAS Repertory Theater, and you would have thought that it was World War III. Because the fact is that people, I mean, a person came up to me one time and said, what are you guys going to do, a show? You're going to have some black bees with their hair nappy, and you can have them and put them on stage to model clothes? I said, yes, brother. He said, well, I'll buy a ticket just to see this. I said, here's the ticket. But when they came there, and they saw their people. They saw the sisters with their hair natural. And what we did is we had a diverse, group of women, but for the first time, it was flipped over. It was that the majority of them looked like Ebony and Jet. Because Ebony and Jet, the best thing to do for not getting on the cover is for you to be Ebony or Jet. I mean, they had the magazine, they talked about it, but they didn't mean it. And they said that we would not be able to promote this idea because, first of all, it might be okay in some kind of a little show like what you have, but we could not make it in the big time. But we did that because when they saw the beauty of the black woman, and I say this without any fear of successful contradiction, the black woman is the most beautiful woman in the world. That's where we came from, and we built on that. But we also built on that to take that to connect it to the motherland, because in a certain sense, the black woman and Africa, they're analogous. One is the human factor, the being of woman, and the other thing is the continental factor, which is the motherland, she giving birth to the first people. And we don't have to even go through that anymore because every stretch of the imagination, they can say what they want. They can talk about Afrocentricity, if it's good or it's bad. They can talk about what we're dealing with as far as ancient Kemet is concerned. The fact is that everybody knows that when you start looking for antiquity, and you start looking for human remains, you don't go to Europe. You don't go to Asia, you go to Africa. You know where it is. And you know that in Africa, because we are the original people, that people evolve based on the conditions that their environment. And so when you have kinky hair, which the hair coils so that it throws off the rays of the sun, so that you do not have the sun penetrated to your hair. That's why we know that Europeans didn't build no pyramids, because they didn't have pith helmets at the time. I mean, besides, they weren't even there. But the fact is that when we start to look at our people and where we were thousands of years ago and where we are today, where we were in Africa thousands of years ago compared to other so-called civilizations, where we are today having the richest continent in the world and having our people be among the poorest people in the world. It's a fundamental contradiction that should not allow or be allowed to continue. Last year, the people of the Congo made a historic revolution. They made a historic revolution. They put into place, erupted. Would I say that? Let us look at the Congo. Because you know, when you start to talk about Africa, Africa and Congo become synonymous. I remember when we were in school, little kids, and there was these, they give you these books that you have to read, and so I always try to go through the book first to see what it is, what was going on. It was a geography book, and they had different people symbolizing different territories. Like for instance, there was a chapter on the Eskimos. They had this kid, Nanook of the North. You know, we said, damn, Nanook of the North, and they went into about the Eskimos. But when you went further in the book, there was this little naked boy with little grass leaves around his waist, and it said, Nambo of the Congo. Shut the book quick. So what's up with this, you know? Because this don't look like the rest of stuff. The rest of people all are dressed and everything else. And then you start to think about what they were trying to do, what they were trying to present. And then you started to see other things that gave you an indication that if you look through, I'm looking at a book the other day that had all of these movies that dealt with the Congo. Carlos Cruz pointed out that when you look at the history of the Congo, that, you know, the Congo, and Chancellor Williams wrote this, had a dynasty that was hundreds of years older than Belgium before it became a state. Well, here we have a situation where the Congo is being projected, you know, with all of these negative things. And the worst manifestation of this, an example, is King Kong. Because what they did in King Kong, although they took the historic title of the Manicongo, and they turned it into a gorilla. Turned it into a gorilla. So that you had this thing about this gigantic gorilla, that every year, you know, the quote natives used to sacrifice an African woman to him. They come down, the whole thing was about, if you remember the picture, and they made different versions of it, but they always had the same theme. That's a spin-off of it. But in King Kong, the fact was that when they did the one they did a couple of years ago, and the one they did in I think the 1930s or the 40s, when King Kong, who had been supposed to be dealing with having an African woman brought to him, you know, at this particular festival, but when he saw this white woman, he blew his mind. I mean, he went crazy. He went ape. Carol tells he went ape. He went ape, and ended up having to go all the way across the world to the United States, you know, and end up climbing the Empire State Building and come crashing down the ground over a white woman. You know. Now, you see, you don't really understand the part about the gorilla because you didn't think about the Manicongo. So that's why you got to put all these things together. You see, you can't just be talking about it isolated. And so when you go to see King Kong, and those are the days when you used to go to the movie, and black people would be in the movie laughing at Africans. And the white man be doing something, or the African, and they be rooting for the white man. They be, I mean, it was disgusting. They had a Tarzan mentality. But ours was the Congo. Even though in the movie King Kong, they put it on the island. But the word was there, Congo, King Kong, you know? So the fact is that the attack with Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, always about the Congo. And they tell you everything negative about the Congo. People who Europeans wanted to get big money, wanted to get props. They would go, they'd go into the Congo. And so what we had then is that after the Catholic Church, had come in there and got, one of the young men to become baptized, and it then took him off to Europe, they still had not been able to penetrate. But in November of 1884, this meeting would be only concerned with the development of commerce in Africa. And so therefore, what they wanted to do was to make sure that all the Europeans who would be involved would be able to chart out their particular spheres of influence in Africa so they wouldn't have to fight each other. Now, the Congo was the heart of this whole thing. And the person who was the principal agitator for having this meeting was King Leopold II of Belgium. And he had gotten Bismarck of Germany to host it. Now, my overture to you is to talk about the Congo and Africa and you and us. Where do we come in on this? If you read Booker T. Washington's Up From Slavery, you'll find out that there's a chapter that talks about when he went to Europe. He had been doing this work in Tuskegee, and the white people said, look, you need a break. Let's send you on a trip to Europe. And he toured around Europe, and he said that when he got to England, he was just gave a presentation at the Royal College of the Blind. I don't know if this has anything to do really essentially with the story, but that's actually where he was, the Royal College of the Blind. And so what happens is that as he did that, he ran into Henry Morton Stanley. You remember Stanley, Dr. Livingston, I presume? Well, don't presume anything that you know about Stanley until you hear this. Booker T. Washington says that after he talked to Stanley and tried to, to engage him and to find out what it was that black people from the West could do, he said after he talked to Stanley, he felt that there was nothing that black people could do in Africa. Well, why did Stanley tell him that? Because Stanley was an agent for King Leopold to open up Africa for commerce. So therefore, the fact that Stanley discouraged Booker T. Washington because they were not interested in Africans having anything to do with Africa. They were interested in Europeans doing this, and they were using the fact that there was some slavery on the East Coast. So they said that by the Arabs. So they were going to go in there to deal with the Arab slave trade. But that's not what they really was about. They were really trying to give some kind of facade to what they wanted to do, and that is to carve Africa among themselves. And so what they did is they had all of these European countries, Belgium, France, you had Italy, you had Germany, you had England, you had all these countries, Portugal, all of them were in there, and all of them gave these statements. And the one country that was there, but was slick enough not to take any colonies, was the United States of America. The regime or the administration of Grover Cleveland. Now, Grover Cleveland was a very interesting fellow. Here was a guy who was twice the governor of New York. He was a guy who used force when he became the president to squash workers' fights, white workers, trying to get what they thought was just due to them, and was a person that couldn't stand black people here. So, you can imagine what he thought about the black people in Africa. He had a race, he had a history where he felt that this country was not a country that black people should have anything to do with. And he said that as an elected official, the highest elected official in the state, the governor of New York. And so what he said at that particular time through his spokesman, Henry Casson, was that the United States gives its blessings to what they were doing there. that the United States was down with this, and proceeded to allow for Leopold to able to get hold of the Congo. He got the biggest piece. The Congo was 77 times bigger than Belgium. 77 times. And this reprobate got the Congo, and in a kind of ironic twist, or sardonic domain, it was not a colony like the rest of them, like France and Britain. This was not a colony. This was his own personal property, 77 times bigger than his own country. And what he did with it is he started to bleed the people for rubber. The bicycle had been invented, the car had been invented, it needed rubber. And they got people that you would call Uncle Toms, alternate. I tell you, sometimes when you use the word Uncle Tom with some of these black people we're talking about, it's an insult to Uncle Tom's memory. I mean, it's an insult. If you read Uncle Tom's Cabin, you'll find that Uncle Tom helped Eliza escape over the ice. Remember that? And in the end, when this white master gave him a whip and told him to beat this black woman, he refused to do it. He said, "Look, you can have my body, but you can't have my soul." And he refused to do it, and he had to give it to this guy Quimbo. Quimbo beat the woman and beat Tom to death. And when you look at some of these Negro leaders out here, Uncle Tom is a revolutionary Marxist, Leninist, black nationalist, fire breather, compared to some of these people that we're talking about out there. So we got to be very careful how we, use that honorific. Uncle Tom becomes honorific when you apply it to them. But what happened is that they would cut off the people's hands, and there are photographs of this. There are photographs you see where they cut the people's hands off at the wrist if you did not collect enough rubber. And in that particular time that he ruled, this is Leopold, from 1885 to 1908, he decimated half of the population. Over 10 million people were killed in that for him to make the tremendous riches that he did. It was such a barbaric thing he was doing, the way he dealt with people, that what they did was Europeans had to speak out against it. Edward Morel, an Englishman, decried this thing, wrote Red Rubber, talked about what was going on there, talked about what was going on in other parts of Africa. You had Roger Casement, an Irishman. But more than that, you had somebody that all of us know, but don't know him in the context of his anti-imperialism. That's Mark Twain. Mark Twain was so outraged that he said that he blamed the carnage in the Congo on, quote, the United States, which he considered the godfather of the Congo graveyard. The godfather of the Congo graveyard. And so they finally had to take the Congo away from Leopold and gave it to the Belgian government to run it as a colony. During that particular time, the Catholic Church took over its education. So that later on, when they got independence, they didn't even have more than 5 or 6 college graduates. In fact, less than that. As soon as they got the colony, the United States came in. Thomas Fortune Ryan, and he made a fortune. Guggenheim was there, Maya Guggenheim, This ain't Khalid Muhammad saying this now. And Baruch, the Baruchs were there too, So when you go down and look at, the Guggenheim Museum, and you look at Baruch Center for Higher Learning, remember that. These people, man, were exploiting our people. And it went on and on. The Rockefellers, everybody came in there, and they exploited the country. And as the Europeans were raping Africa, they continued to be looking at the Congo and at Belgium. You know, when you go into, if you go into the Congo, usually you have to go by Sabina Airlines, a Belgian airline. And when you come in there, they tell you that Belgium is the heart of Europe. And we know that the Congo is the heart of Africa. But it makes more sense to have the Congo as the heart of Africa, because here's a country that is so big. It's the third largest country in Africa after the Sudan, Algeria. And when Lumumba came along and was opening up the Congo to other Pan-Africanists, because we talk about Pan-Africanism, you know, and after Kwame Ture died, there was a blossoming. I didn't know there were so many Pan-Africanists out here. Everybody suddenly was a Pan-Africanist. But as Alton said, by you know, activist by his work, you know, those who are Pan-Africanists should be about Pan-Africanist work. And the work that we should be about right now is to focus on what is happening in the Congo in particular, but in Africa in general, and how we can tie up the over 40 million Africans in the United States, the over 100 million Africans in the Western Hemisphere, to see that Africa becomes liberated and becomes its resources be marshaled and harnessed for the betterment of all black mankind. That's Pan-Africanism. That's what we need to be talking about. How can we have a situation where today black people in the United States of America spend over $500 billion a year? $500 billion a year. If we were a separate country, if we had our own political nationhood, and we had $500 billion that we was generating as gross national product, we were among the 10 richest nations in the world. And there's over 150 nations out there. So just think about that. And we have the money to actually develop Africa. We have the money to actually develop many of the products that we need right here. And it doesn't mean that you can't pursue what you're doing because of you seeking democratic rights, so-called civil rights. There's no contradiction there. What we are saying, though, is that you need to have a dual role, a dual road to liberation. That when at one point you're making certain democratic rights, demands on the state, at the same time you're also arguing that through self-determination we have to do some things for ourselves. We have to understand this. We talked before about the things that black people can do and what we could really be doing better. And when Alton talks about the summer camp, that is what you have to do when you get children away from, you know, even if the brother's gonna have to wrestle with them, to hold them down, to get them to learn something. The fact is that you have to almost isolate your youth to a point where they can appreciate themselves as to who they are and what their role and responsibility has to do, or else they'll be turned against us. This country knows that in the Congo, the wealth is so immense and is so important that they have said that the Congo, now check this out, is a geological scandal. There's so much wealth in the Congo that it is a geological scandal. When they wanted to make the Manhattan Project, when they were working on the Manhattan Project to make the atomic bomb, they had to get the uranium from the Shinkalobe mines of Katanga. You know, you need the cobalt, the copper, the diamonds, even that there's, you know, the fact that there's oil. The fact that the rivers in the Congo River, if you could harness that river, you could electrify all of Africa, the whole continent of Africa. There's so much power in that river. The land is so vast. There's enough land there, and don't let anybody tell you that Africa has to always suffer these cyclical changes where drought appears. There's enough land excuse me, that has to be tilled that could actually feed all of the continent. I mean, this is what the prospects are. And so what we're talking about is, how do we, you know what they did to Lumumba? When Lumumba came on the scene, because Lumumba was a genuine Pan-Africanist, and because he wanted to connect the Congo, that valuable piece of real estate, to other radical countries, particularly those in the so-called Casablanca group. Those are the countries like Ghana under Sajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, Guinea under Ahmed Sekou Touré, Mali under Modibo Keita, Morocco under then King Mohammed V. And the reason why it's called the Casablanca group is because of the name of Casablanca in Morocco. Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, and of course the Algerian National Liberation Front. These countries are seen as being too radical, as opposed to, say, the Monrovia group, which is there with Tubman, before Talbot, and Haile Selassie, the Emperor of Ethiopia, and also the French countries. Because what you had in the end of the 50s, just as you had a civil rights movement start up here in 1955, in 1956 you had the first black state in the post-World War II period to get its independence, the Sudan. The Sudan came on the stage 14 months before Ghana. The Sudan coming on the stage of independence on the 1st of January 1956. Ghana coming on the stage of independence in March 7th or March 6th, 1957. But because Kwame Nkrumah was focused and had spent time here and had, learned Garvey, and because the Sudan, even though it is a black country, the name coming from Bilad es-Sud, or Bilad es-Sudan, meaning the land of the blacks, they had been programmed that they were Arabs. They had taken Islam to the point where they programmed themselves as being Arabs, even though they were black. And so when Ishmael el-Azari, who was a black man, I mean, he could fit in this audience comfortably. But when they came to independence, they still had a fight going on in the South that rages on until today. So we went with Kwame Nkrumah. And then when the following year, the French gave de Gaulle gave a referendum to the colonies, 13 colonies that the French had in Africa. Only Sekou Touré of Guinea and the Democratic Party of Guinea voted no. The referendum was, one, if you wanted to stay within the French family, you voted yes. And if you wanted to depart, to go on your own, you voted no. The French said, if you do that, nothing's going to happen. Just say adieu, or mon frère, and they would go. But when Sekou Touré said, we prefer independence in poverty rather than neocolonialism and in wealth, they couldn't understand that. And so they were furious at Sekou Touré. They wanted to make sure that he paid for it. And they took everything they could out. Not only did they take all the administrators out, the people out, they took out light bulbs, they took out the books, they took out typewriters. They were intended to destroy that country. But it was then that Kwame Nkrumah reached in and said, no, brother, I will help you, under the spirit of Pan-Africanism. And because they did that, they became the two together. That's the reason why Stokely Carmichael changed his name to Kwame Touré, for both Asajifo, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, and for Ahmed Sekou Touré, because he understood that dynamic of Pan-Africanism. Because here they got two people who were born into colonialism. One, Nkrumah was from, the people in Ghana. He was, I guess he would be an Nzema. And as a result of him being an Nzema, he spoke that language. He was raised as a Catholic, and he spoke English. Sekou Touré was a Malinke. He spoke Malinke or Mandingo. He was a person who also was a Muslim, and he spoke Kabila, who was a person that 37 years ago who was a youth in Lumumba's movement. It was in Lumumba's movement in Katanga province, which was the most hostile province to Lumumba because it was headed up by Moise Tshombe and Godfrey Malungu, who eventually would kill Lumumba. But Tshombe, who was a flunky of the Western powers, he would get an opportunity even to rule the Congo after the CIA interrupted Lumumba's government and put in one Joseph Desiree Mobutu. And this guy, who was a aide to Lumumba, who was a person who was like one who was in training, to be close to Lumumba, turned on Lumumba and took over the Congo as the Congolese strongman, eventually setting Lumumba up to be killed. And he had ruled that place from 1960, not from 65 that they tell you, from 1960 until he died last year. But when his time, that's right, Johnny, he dead. In fact, we all would dance on his grave. But after we found out that he died, by that time we found out it wasn't even worth it. What was worth it was that the Congolese people had an opportunity now to go about their business. And so when the opportunity rose, when the so-called Banyamulenge, that's the ethnic Tutsis of Congo, when they rose up in October of 1996, by that time, all the groups that had been fighting against Mobutu, many of them coalesced, and they formed the Alliance for the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of the Congo. They had to give it to somebody who had the credentials. That was Laurent Kabila. Now, we had the Rwandan government who had just come to power after seeing 1 million of its people killed in 8 days. Genocide. And we have to study that because anytime that one group of black people can kill 1 million of their same group in the shortest period of time, 98 days, that was the worst genocide in the history of the world. Why do I say that? Because one, based on the number of people who were killed and the shortest period of time. When we get into these contradictions with, Jewish people who continue to promote the Holocaust, and that's their business, they can promote it, But the fact is that we know our Holocaust, and Holocaust is not a word that belongs to the Jews or anybody else. It's just a word coming out of Latin that means to destroy by fire. It does not. The Jews have their own word for Holocaust. It's called Shoah, S-H-O-A. That's their word. That's the Hebrew. But the word Holocaust, which we always get into these fights about, has nothing to do, with them to the extent that nobody else can use it, like they did with some of the brothers out there in Brooklyn giving the Black Holocaust Memorial. But what happens now is that the difference between that happened in Germany and what happened in the U.S. And if you're going to actually talk about what was most important, is a matter of amount of people who were killed, because here you can't even start to count the amount of people who were killed in the Holocaust. But the fact is that the Holocaust in Germany that exterminated the European Jews, and and the one that's also exterminated gypsies. And you had 22 million Russians that died in the fighting against Hitler. That took place in Germany. Our Holocaust took place here. And our Holocaust was built on also establishing the wealth of the United States. Because when you understand that in order for you to have wealth, you have to have it generated by work on land. And when you look at that this country was built by stolen labor on stolen land, that means that when you try to assess the value and how the land became productive, shows that anybody who benefited by unjust enrichment in the fact that they took somebody else's work and applied it for them without payment, and they took somebody's land and misappropriated the land. So that means that we don't owe them a damn thing. We don't owe them nothing. They owe everything to us. Because the fact is that the reason why people come here, people run over here, is because this was a rich land. Why was it a rich land? Because the wealth was actually developed without paying anybody for it. If you had to pay people for the land and pay them for the work, there'd be nobody running from other countries, man, coming here. They came here before we had this thing about communism. Before we had it. As a matter of fact, they always talk about African countries and about, like they told Kabila, well, where is your government? We want some elections here. They didn't ask Mobutu for them elections when he was working for them. They didn't ask him for that. But the fact is that this country declared its independence in 1776. They didn't have no elections until 1789. 13 years they didn't have an election. And when they did have the election, they put George Washington in charge. And George Washington, was a man that had slaves, African slaves, at his plantation in Mount Vernon, Virginia, traded some to the Caribbean back and forth. Thomas Jefferson, who wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." This cracker, had people chained up at his plantation in Monticello, Virginia. And we didn't need no DNA to tell us that what he did to Sally Hemings for one child, because he had a host of children by Sally Hemings. So we're looking at these people for what they really are, what they're about. When we find out that Madison, who was the surrogate to Jefferson, that in trying to resolve a contradiction between the North and the South, that they could not actually they could not count black people as whole, because that would give them a disproportionate number, since they didn't want to count them as people anyway. So what he did is he came up with a solution that we were only 3/5 human. So we're 3/5 human, 2/5 beast. That means that we can't be counted as whole persons. That way we'll take them off the register and still acknowledging they were there. So with a stroke of the pen, they dehumanize the people who gave civilization to mankind. So what we're talking about, man, is not, when we start talking about a Holocaust, we're talking about something that was so diabolical, something that was so atrocious about what they had done to our people, that the question of reparations is something that's the only real solution if you're going to talk about, arguing over welfare or workfare. Man, how are we going to be talking about workfare? They owe us, they owe us. On Sunday, they had a program on America's Black Forum that come on before Gil Noble. They had Yaphet Kotto on there. They said Yaphet Kotto said that Yaphet Kotto coming to talk about reparations. I was getting ready to walk out the room and say, wait, let me hear this. I said, damn, I didn't know Yaphet was down with the plan, But then he says that well, I ain't coming out, they asked him about the reparation question. He said, no, I didn't really, I'm not for reparations. I think that's stupid. He said, I wanted to find out the money that was in the Freedmen's Bureau, where that money went. That's all he was interested in, finding out where that. Then he said that he was Jewish. Said that his first name, Yafet, means beautiful in Hebrew. And that on the Koto side, that's because he's well, I stopped to look at the program because I had to come back from like it is anyway. But I said, let me go and see what this is about. And what he did is they presented them as somebody coming to talk about reparations, but what he did is he just confused the whole issue. And so I guess that's what will be happening now. We have to be chasing that. Yeah, where's the money for the Freedmen's Bureau? You know? Well, wait a minute, we talking about reparations. I mean, the Freedmen's Bureau, that's cool, you know? Everything, we should get everything we deserve. But we were talking about reparations, bro, you know? And if you ain't about reparations, you should get off the program. Because you came on and you're going to talk about reparations. What I'm talking about is the idea is to scramble. That's why you have to have these sessions. Because if you don't have these sessions, man, look, I could tell you so many brothers that we had to bury in the movement. Just couldn't handle it no more. I mean, it's cracked up. Broke up under the pressure because of the twisted logic or illogic that's out there. The Congo is now beset by some warring factions. One, that you had both the Ugandans and the Rwandans, who were major players in the unity of this tremendous accomplishment when the Congo became free last year. And when I say this with a deep hurt, because we know all of the people, all of the players. When you start to look back historically, when the RPF, the Rwandan Patriotic Front, came in to address the issue of the genocide, we were the first ones to come out here to have forums to try to talk about what was going on while it was going on. Clinton had instructed all of his diplomats, do not mention the word genocide in regards to Rwanda. All of them officially had the word, you do not talk about genocide when you talk about Rwanda. Why? Because the United States is a signatory to the United Nations Convention Against Genocide, which came about in 1948. And if you are a signatory to that particular act, then you are obligated to intervene to stop genocide from occurring. They did not want it to happen. My own opinion is, and when Alter was speaking before, he mentioned about depopulation. He mentioned about the plans in Africa. That since Rwanda has the highest population density in Africa, and if not the world, for a small country to have that many people packed in it, that it was really it was a depopulation experiment. Because the same way AIDS, you know, AIDS from the beginning I said that you can't get caught up in this argument now, particularly in the white academia, you know, about is AIDS caused by HIV or is it caused by something else? Is it a compilation of a bunch of diseases? AIDS is an acquired imperialist dependency syndrome. That's what AIDS is, an acquired imperialist dependency syndrome. That as long as we're still dependent on imperialism and all its machinations, then we'll always be in a problem, always have a problem. Marcus Garvey put together, you know, the Universal African Nurses, or Black Cross nurses, because he realized that you would have to have nurses if you go into war. If you're going to get involved with something, you have to have your health has to be taken care of by yourself. We can't be, I mean, you get out here and start something in the streets right now, and then in the middle of it, you count them, you say, hold it, I got to go to the hospital, tell them we're bringing our wounded in. So, I mean, what kind of nonsense is that? How you be bringing your wounded in, talking about time out fingers, you know? You can't fight no revolution like that. You know what Elijah Muhammad said in regards to hunger, and it could be applied so easily today when you start talking about, you know, our people starving all the time, whether it's in the United States or the Caribbean, you know, if the hurricane or whatever, or in Africa, where you constantly see this. He said, quote, the black man has to take his, how do we resolve this contradiction? We have that when the Rwandans, led by a Major Paul Kagame, Major General Paul Kagame, who was trained here in the United States, left the United States, went over there, took over that, military force. You have President Yoweri Museveni in Uganda, who we had here in Harlem over at Harriet Tubman in 1987 when he talked to us about slavery. I mean, he had just come to power, and we were supportive of his group, the National Resistance Front. And so I went down to the United Nations at the corner, we was giving a presentation on AIDS, and we brought him up to Harlem so he could speak directly to people. And we thought this man, I mean, he had some brilliant ideas. Well, we known Sam and Nyomo since 1960 when they first formed SWAPO. We formed the Patrice Lumumba Coalition on the 11th of November 1975, the same day as the People's Republic of Angola was being formed, so that we could actually carry on a campaign to knock out this red baiting stuff that was going on about the MPLA. And of course we supported Zimbabwe, and we supported in particular the Patriotic Front, and even more acutely in particular we supported ZANU. So we know these people. And what we're saying to you, so when we make a choice in saying who is right and who is wrong, we take it where we don't have no kind of, we could have cut it anyway. We could say any one of them was right. But we had to we had to look at the thing for what it was. The reason why you have the chaos in the Congo right now is because the United States never did want Laurent Kabila. They didn't want Kabila because they know in 1965 that he was the person who Che Guevara had to report to when he got to the Congo. And Kabila was just a young person, about maybe 26 years old, whereas Che Guevara was a legend, you know, and come here to do some help. And Che was very upset about that. But what Kabila was also concerned about was that you can't be fighting a war there when you don't even know the language. And that Che didn't speak Lingala, he didn't speak Kiswahili. And to show you how that works, when he went later on, he got disgusted with the Congo. And we could give all kind of props of what Che tried to do there to help the Lumumba's cause. But he went to Bolivia, he couldn't speak Quechua, the language that they spoke the Indians spoke in Bolivia, and he was seen as an outsider and was able to be trapped off, particularly when the CIA zeroed in on him. So the point is that the United States didn't want him because, as Kabila said, and now you would have seen it in the film, that it's because they first knew that they would say he was a Marxist, and that therefore that he was a danger to them and danger to their cause. So what he did is get together with all these other groups, and they put together this alliance. The alliance was a good thing, but he also had the problem of that, particularly the question of the Rwandans, that they didn't really want to deal with him straight up. In Uganda and Rwanda, two countries that we said we supported, but we have had to look at it over again. Uganda is involved with the Pentagon. They're involved with a military pact, two military pacts. One is called JCET, the Joint Combined Exchange Training Program, where they trained with U.S. military people. And The other is IMET, International Military Education Training Program. In the other case of Rwanda, they're also involved in the military pact with the U.S. too, and also with Israel. Because the Israelis told Kagame, that as long as you go through genocide, now listen to this carefully because we have to use it in our own application towards our liberation. As long as you are involved in genocide, you have been understand us. And Kagame has made numerous trips to Israel throughout the years since 1995. And so they now see themselves as the Israel. This is Rwanda, this little state, sees itself as the Israel of Africa, where they can go and move against anybody that they think is not an interest. They claim that Kabila did not do enough to stop the people who were attacking him, attacking their country from the base of inside the Congo. And so what we have now is that the United States thought they could just get rid of him. So these two countries were set against Kabila, and they were on their way. I mean, probably a lot of people here gave up. I mean, a lot of people started coming and asking about the Congo. They saw the stuff in the newspaper. They don't ask you no more. So, well, this is another failed venture. But they didn't believe that Kabila would be able to go and organize by talking to the Angolans, talking to the Namibians, talking to the Zimbabweans. And so now they have a stalemate. Because even though that the people who invaded still control the eastern portion of the country, the major advance they had made by getting to the western part by the stuff of an airplane and flying troops over to across the country was negated by the efforts of the Angolans, the Namibians, and the Zimbabweans. So brothers and sisters, and that is effective Pan-Africanism. But it's not over yet, because now they have gotten Jonas Savimbi back into the play. And Savimbi now is moving, who should have been dealt with 10 years ago, and even before that. The Battle of Kutakunaval, when Angolans and the South and the Namibians and the Cubans defeated South Africa and forced the South Africans to then acquiesce in giving Namibia its independence and pulling out of Angola. Now we are back to square one. And what is missing in actually trying to get this thing going is the African community here. And that's one of the reasons why I felt that it was important to come to speak to you at the United African Movement. Because I believe that you're genuine in your concern for Africa, and I believe that you just have to know some information, you'll be able to deal with it. Alden talked about these Negro leaders. You know, a couple of months ago, we had to get on their case because the reactionaries in this country, urged on by the Fraternal Order of Police, this time of Jersey, had put up a resolution that they should demand that the government of Cuba extradite Sister Assata Shakur back here, Resolution 254. And all of these Negro leaders, all of them, now the ones in New York is too slick because they knew we were all up here. And we had all come rushing down to their door, so they all ran out the door and didn't sign nothing. But the rest of them signed on to that. They signed on to that. When Herman Ferguson of the New African Liberation Front put out some circles with Charlie Rango's picture and Adolphus Towns and Minor Owens and all of them, and started to talk about all these people, man, called a bunch of, you sold out the black nation. So he sent one down to Maxine Waters. And Maxine was so upset. You know, Maxine came on, you might have heard on BAI where she was trying to say the excuse. She said that she didn't know that Joanne Chesimard and Assata Shakur was the same person. All of them Negroes. You know, where were they living? They're supposed to know what's going on. But more than this, at this same podium this past Sunday, no, Saturday, Herman Ferguson said that he called, Maxine Waters called him and tried to explain to him what had happened, why she made the mistake. And then she said, now, after you hear this, do you still think I'm an Uncle Tom? He said, yes. Herman sat there to escort him back when he came back here to face the charges 19 years later. And then he had to go into the prison. You know, still go into prison and then come out and still organizing. And I've been thinking that she can get away with something like that. I said, no way. These people do not support political prisoners here. I mean, Jesse Jackson go all over the world, found some Negro named Good. Remember him? And brought him back here because he was flying a mission over one of the countries over there. And I think it was Syria. And they brought him back here. You could not hear him talk about, a Mumia. Like Alden said, he just made a cameo appearance because we put so much heat on it. But I'm saying there's a lot of political prisoners, He didn't, when the grassroots builds the movement so high, then they come on board. But when they don't, if you don't hear it, they won't say it. Like, don't ask, don't tell. That's how they deal with our people. They do not. He's a special envoy for Africa for President Clinton. I told him when they was first starting, I said, look, how are you going to go out there with Clinton when you don't know if he's going to have a job? I said that back in April. Because you know what Clinton said? Clinton said, I don't know how he feels now. Because he's hanging, he's on a slippery slope. But some months ago, the Wall Street Journal reported that he was supposed to have told some people, look, they'll never put me out of office over a sexual scandal unless they find me with a dead woman or a live boy. You heard that? Said that they will never put me out of office over a sexual scandal unless they find me with a dead woman or a live boy. See, now, Clinton got himself up into a whole lot of stuff. He's up in the African comma now. The deposition that he gave on January the 17th in the Paula Jones suit, which got him into this question of perjurious testimony. I said it was January 17th. That's the day they killed Lumumba. That was the day they killed Lumumba. The day January 17th, the only thing was 1961. And then when he comes back and he comes on the radio after Monica Lewinsky testified, he had to come on and said, now you remember you saw him before, he said, I did not have sex with that woman. Monica Lewinsky. I said, when he said that, I said, now he done messed up. I don't know, I didn't see nothing. But I know you don't make no statements like that because they come back to haunt you. So when he came back, the next time I had to come on there with that 4-minute statement and said that I did have an improper relationship. That was August 17th. That's Garvey's birthday. That's your anniversary. So somehow, that's up there, it's up there into the African cosmos. He's in trouble, big trouble, and a plague on all the houses. When Alton started talking about how those Negro leaders, I said, now Alton done stole my stuff. Because I wanted to talk about that. I think it's the most disgusting thing. We talked about it last Saturday. John Lewis. You could go all. They was rabid. They was frothing at the mouth. They had never. It's one thing to say, look, we're in the Democratic Party. This is our main man. We got to back him up. But the lies they told about what he was supposed to have done for black people. He got a crime bill. that he let go through, man, that has so many ways to kill people now. I mean, you got the kind of stuff where they can say now that even if they know that you're innocent, they can say, you know what, I see you may have some new information, but you know what, your time was up, so we're going to kill you anyway. They can execute you now, even though they know that you're innocent. That's cold-blooded murder. Let's say this, for the question of Mumia. Thomas Ridge, the governor of Pennsylvania, has said that when Mumia's last appeal, this last one, if that is turned down, he's going to sign the death penalty. Okay, he didn't do it right away. Sam Donaldson, however, set the stage for it. We all saw that thing that Sam Donaldson did, that hit piece, where he tried to turn all of the Mumia supporters into people who don't know anything, and say he found the answer and come up with the same story they started out in the beginning. And then said, excuse me, that we've heard the story, we've heard both sides. Mumia's defense doesn't hold any water. The man is convicted. When are they going to carry out the death sentence? They need to go carry out the sentence. This is what Sam Donaldson said. So he's all doing that. But there's a case that you must keep your eye on. In fact, I had to talk to Malton about how we're going to try and deal with this. You know, like on our circulars on the bottom, we usually have Save the Lives of Mumia Abu Jamal, Gary Graham, and Thomas Miller L. Those are three cases we put out, that we picked up out of many. Thomas Miller L. is a Moorish American, and I think that they're getting ready. He's also in Texas. They're getting ready to give him a death sentence. But Gary Graham, who was a case that was being championed by Danny Glover until they threatened his life and threatened his children's life, that he had to back down a little bit. Gary Graham, who had a case that started in 1981, the same year as Mumia, where he was supposed to have killed some white man who was a drug pusher who had come out of state and into Texas to deal with a transaction. He had a court-appointed attorney, Ronald Mock, who was known to allow people to be railroaded, and actually even gave a glowing appraisal of the one witness, Barbara Skillen, who identified, or tried to say that she could identify Gary Graham, whose name now is Shaka Sankofa. 12 years after, because they suppressed this information, this lawyer, they found that 12 years after that there were 6 eyewitnesses who saw, these are people who don't know Gary Graham or Shaka Sankofa, who saw who did it and say it was not the same, it was not this brother. There were 4 alibi witnesses that say that he was there somewhere else. And in 1993, he had 3 death dates, one after another. All of them were stayed at the very last minute. He was the first one that get the death date of August 17, Garvey's birthday, your anniversary. We had to raise hell at that particular time. So we just can't let you go ahead and execute anybody on Garvey's birthday. Later on, 2 years later, they gave that same date, remember, to Mumia, August 17th again. In any event, what is happening is he has just gotten, as of last week, I think, or 2 weeks ago, a new death date. He is scheduled to be executed in Texas on January 11th, 1999. And we are in the process now of trying to put together a task force to try to save the life of Gary Graham or Shaka Sankofa. And I think that's something we got to try. Because this could be a test case to see if they can get away with that to go for Mumia. But even if that was not the case at all, because of who he is, The brother is coming to his consciousness. His life is worth saving, and we think that he needs to be saved by us committing all of our forces, all of our resources to that particular goal. And I mean, I'll try to get as much information to Alton so we can turn him. And she's also, she worked with Amnesty International as an advocate for Gary Graham. And finally, there is on the day after, well, the first day of Kwanzaa, the day after Christmas on Saturday, I don't have the circular with me, but there's going to be an activity in Brooklyn to have Kwanzaa in the street, to come out and to try to articulate and raise all these questions. And I thought I had one of the circles with me. I don't know if anybody has it here to give you all of the details, but you can find out the details by calling 718-398-1766. Brothers and sisters, excuse me? Oh yeah, the lawyer's closing statement on this particular Gary Graham case is that the woman who testified against Gary Graham. Now here's the defense lawyer for Gary Graham says that his lawyer gets up there and says that the woman is believable. She is, you know, a heroine, and she's worthy of worship. I mean, what happened to Ashanti Chimarenga? John look at me like I'm crazy. Ashanti Chimarenga said that when she was talking to Gary, he said, let me read this statement back to you and then tell me who did it. And the statement I just told you, that's what she said, who was that, the prosecutor? He said, no, that was my lawyer. And they said this guy used to make some nice money. I think he made $150,000 a year by taking these, or being appointed these cases. They had a working relationship. So this is what we're up against. And the fact is that if we don't deal with it, then it's going to come back to us. That's right. That's right. Well, we're gonna take care of that though. He's gonna get his license back. That's gonna happen. That's gonna happen. That's gonna happen. And that's gonna happen because the people are going to make it happen. And because since some people said that he should vote for Chuck Schumer, I didn't. You know, I didn't vote for him either. You know, I was hoping that he had to win without me. But since he is there, you know, he's going to have to work on that. We talked about it already, John. Yeah, we talked about it. The fact is, though, that there's a lot of things that can be done. And it don't take that many people to do it. Because if we waited for everybody to get involved, nothing ever happened at all. So, I mean, there's enough people here, there's enough people in other places to combine together that can really do something, I think, that will make 1999 a real lively year. You know, so we enter this millennium. And I want to just leave you with the words of Marcus Garvey. When confronted with the imperialists, he reminded us that, you know, when all of the means fail to organize the people, conditions will. Remember that. All of me. He said, Mr. White Man, are you mad? Are you insane? Do you think that you can continue to rule the world on a bluff? Do you think you can withstand the power of Africa and Asia combined? I say to you, Europe for the Europeans, Asia for the Asians, but above all, Africa for the Africans, those at home and those abroad. Thank you very much.
Brother Elombe Brath, let's give it up. Brother Elombe Brath. Asante Sana, my brother. Asante Sana. Brother Elombe Brath. we've been very blessed. We don't want anybody to move because we're getting ready to leave. You know, when you listen to Elombe Brath, it's better than reading the encyclopedia. All right? It's better than